Okay, we are underway. Welcome, everyone. My name is Derek. I'm going to be running the meeting. If you've attended these before, we've done them for a few years now. So some of you may be attending for the second or maybe even third time. Welcome. Today is November 13th, 2024. This is the Professional Ethics webinar presented by the Nevada Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. It is a required PDH requirement for license renewal. So we provide this in that regard to fulfill that, to allow you to fulfill that requirement to obtain 2 hours of professional ethics. So I'm going to read from my script here a little bit. By attending today's webinar, licensees will fulfill the PDH requirement for 2 hours of professional ethics. So that's the official word. We're going to limit this to 500 attendees. It looks like, so I'm clicking frantically, letting people in. We're limited to 500 attendees. However, we always record these and post them on our website on YouTube so that you can watch them later and you can get the same credit. You're obviously attending live, so that's not you're going to get the credit. You're going to get the credit for attending live. But if you wanted to watch later on, or if somebody in your office wants to watch, you can point them to our website where they can get the same credit for watching the recorded video. So we usually have a few minutes for questions. You can use the chat function in Zoom to ask those questions as we go. I'll do my best to try to respond to them. If we don't get to your question, send me an email. I'll have my email posted later on in the presentation where you can contact me, send me an email, and I can answer the question that way. I will also give you instructions on how to document your attendance in this webinar so that you can report it to when you renew your license. But I will tell you, and as I do each time I do this, in Nevada, we do not require that you provide us any physical proof. We just say it's sort of the honor system. If you attend this webinar, you can claim 2 hours of PDH credit on your renewal. We do not ask you to provide any proof other than that you did this. However, I will provide a certificate at the end, and I'll give you instructions on how to get that certificate if you would like one. But we will never ask you to provide that certificate unless you get audited. Steve we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, so we don't ask for the proof, but I do give you the certificate, and I'll give you instructions later on. So with that, I think we're about ready to start. I'm going to turn it over to Steve and Steve Heiner, and he'll walk you through his presentation. So Steve is a retired civil engineer from Texas, but he is currently a compliance investigator for the Nevada Board. With a 43-plus year career under his belt, he has seen just about everything. Ethics has been part of his job function over the years, and he has conducted ethics presentations for numerous professional organizations around the country. And he's quite good at this. So with that, Steve, I'm going to let you go ahead and get started, and I'll follow along and use chat if you have questions.
Okay, thank you, Derek. Just curious, I have this on my full screen, Derek. So what's the count up to? I'm just curious.
We've got 152 currently.
Okay.
But people are coming in.
Great. I don't think we're going to make that 500 number that Mark made yesterday. For those of you who weren't aware, we held one of these webinars yesterday on rules and regulations, which is also recorded and will be on the website, as Derek mentioned. So it can be watched whenever you need it to fulfill the rules and regulation requirement for a PDH. As he said, I've been doing this for ethics for a number of years, and people ask how I got into it. Well, back, my license is in Texas, not Nevada, and they've had an ethics requirement for a number of years. And back when I first started going to ethics presentations, it was nothing more than an attorney standing up in front of us and reciting chapter and verse of the code. And you were gone in about 10 minutes, and you had to suffer through an hour of it. So I decided to put something together, and I took it to the Texas board and asked them if they would approve it. And they said no. It kind of shocked me, but then they said it is up to the engineer or land surveyor's decision. If they feel it meets the requirements for the ethics PDH, they can count it. And I'm kind of proud to say that I've never had anybody say that they didn't feel that any of these presentations were not fully compliant with the requirements for ethics. So with that being said, and I started doing this in about 2013, so got just over 10 years under my belt with ethics. So let's get into it. We're going to go over a few, I want to call them housekeeping things that I want to share with you. Then we'll get into an actual discussion of ethics, but it all does qualify under the code. So first thing I always talk about, if you've been to these before, I've been doing these 2-hour webinars for a couple of years now. I also did them, if you remember, the Reconnect meetings the board had back in 2018 and 2019. I presented on ethics at those meetings also. So one thing I always do, regardless of what kind of presentation, is I talk about safety, because whether you're in an office all day, out in the field, even at home, you know, that's probably one of the most important things you need to think about. And the question I always ask, since we are spread out all over the state probably, is if you're in an office, what is your evacuation plan? If you had to evacuate the office right now, would you know where to go or what to do? Back when I was working, I was with a manufacturer, and we actually had published evacuation plans for all of our plants with designated meeting areas in case we all had to evacuate. In fact, one of the most, I don't want to say intense, but probably best safety requirements of any meetings I've ever been to is with AREMA. Everybody remember what AREMA stands for? AREMA? American Railroad and Engineering and Maintenance of Way Association. They're the ones who write the railroad specifications, Cooper A80, live loads, things of that nature. And I was on the committee that helped with the standards. But anytime we had a meeting, a committee meeting, we had 2 safety meetings a day. One in the morning before we started, they would designate all the people that were certified for CPR. They would designate a 911 caller, and they would even designate somebody to go out in the parking lot to greet the first responders and lead them to wherever the emergency was. And they held that at the beginning of the day and right after lunch. So they were pretty strict about safety with regards to the railroad. But anyway, it's just something to think about and keep in the back of your mind. As you know, with the board, as you have with most organizations, you have a purpose and a mission. And if you read the mission or purpose of the Nevada Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors, they make a statement about what it is, and that is to safeguard life, health, property, and to promote the public welfare. If you've been to my ethics presentations before, that should sound familiar, because that's the basics of just about any ethics code you look at. They all reference someplace in their code about the #1 priority for the engineer or land surveyor is the safety and safeguard life, health, property, and the public welfare or the public safety. And just as we do here in Nevada. I also always like to introduce the board to you. This is our current Board of Engineers and Land Surveyors, Angelo Spotter being the board chairman, and the other members who you may be associated with already. They're each assigned a 4-year term with a maximum of 3 terms or 12 years before they have to leave their board position. But a lot of good people on the board that you might want to make yourself familiar with. You all probably remember or know of Patty Momola. She been around since I think about 2016 or 15. And as you probably are well aware, she is no longer the executive director. She left back in the spring of this year, actually working and consulting with the NCEES, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And our new executive director, been on board since April, Mark Faulkner, engineer from Southern Nevada, 35 years experience, well-versed in engineering criteria, technical aspects, and also the codes, rules, and regulations. So he's the new leader of the Board of Engineers and Land Surveyors. And of course, the staff of the board. Of course, Mark, executive director. A lot of you have probably talked to Jasmine Bailey. She's the licensing specialist. She's responsible for all the renewals, new applications, commodity licensing, and anything to do with licensing of engineers and surveyors. Murray Blaney, operations and compliance. He covers just about all areas of operations for the board. Myself as the investigator. Ed McGuire, somebody you might be familiar with. He had a long service with the city of Henderson. He joined us about a year ago and is in professional standards. And of course, Derek Vogel, who is our communications director, in charge of all aspects of our website and communications for board activity. Mark talked about this yesterday, and I also like to make reference to it too. There are 2 statutes and codes that we work with, and those are the NRS and NAC section 625. Now, sometimes it's hard to find those if you're looking up for a certain rule or regulation. Well, what we've done is put together a book printed by the state, and it is a complete listing of all the rules and regulations from NRS 625 and NAC 625 that relates to engineering and land surveying. If you would like a copy of it, there's a form on our website. Just fill that out and we will mail you a copy, and it will be sent to the address that we have on file in your profile. But again, you can also go to the website, and that is where you could see the most up-to-date set of standards that are currently available. This is about a year or 2 old. It'll probably be a couple more years before we get the new book, but between this and the website, you have access to all the current statutes and administrative codes. Now, along with our website, we have a newsletter called the Nevada Connection. It's published twice annually. Derek takes care of that publication, but it is a pretty good source of information, keeping you up to date on what's happening within the engineering and land surveying community and anything of pertinent interest that may be critical to engineering and surveying. Along with that, the whole purpose for the webinars yesterday and today is the change in the continuing education requirements. This change came about a few years ago. It's NAC 625-430, and they added the requirement of 1 PDH each renewal period on Nevada laws and regulations. The seminar yesterday or webinar fully complies with that. And as Derek said, you can monitor it or watch it at your leisure on the website. Along with that is what we're doing today. You are required to get 2 PDHs every renewal period covering ethics. Now, unlike Nevada laws and regulations, we also accept ethics presentations from outside of Nevada. We are focusing on mainly Nevada laws and regulations with regards to ethics, but others from outside of the state are also acceptable. One thing to remember, though, is that you need 2 hours. A lot of the webinars you go to, luncheon meetings, it's only 1. So you'll have to pick up an extra one somewhere else. But if you watch these webinars, you're good for your renewal period. Now, I'd just like to take a minute to talk a little bit about the PDH requirements. They are covered by the code. And if you look at NAC section 470, they have the assignment of professional development hours to different activities. So it's just not a one-for-one exchange. You know, a 1-hour technical presentation, of course, is 1 PDH, but there are other activities you can get multiple PDHs for. As an example, 1 credit hour of a college course is worth 45 PDHs. So there are different things that you can get multiple PDHs for, and it's not always you're going to have 30 hours of instruction to get your requirements for renewal. Derek mentioned about proof of completion of the hours. We'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment, but that's also covered under section 480 of NAC. So everything that you need to know about your continuing education requirements are covered in the codes. The reason I'm mentioning this is because, as Derek also said, you do have to have proof of your PDHs if you get audited. And the reason I'm talking about auditors now is I was assigned the responsibility of conducting the audits for this last renewal period, which ended on June 30th of this year. So it's a new job for me. I'm learning a lot with it. And I want to talk a little bit in a minute about what you can do if you do get audited to make it simpler for you and also for us, and also what we're trying to do to make it as easy as possible for you. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, what counts as a PDH, as I mentioned earlier? Of course, there was the section of the code that I mentioned that tells you what the exchange is. Primarily, most people will go to technical presentations, lunchtime meetings, courses, conferences, all of which count as PDH credits. Another big thing, if you're on committees, specification committees like ASTM, ACI, you go to the conferences, all those conference hours count as PDH credits. So there are a lot of different ways you can get your PDHs besides attending webinars and seminars. And basically, the way we look at it, the way I look at it is, and yet you will find this stated in a lot of other states also, and it's a very good rule of thumb. And that is, if it benefits you in your job responsibilities, it can be counted as a PDH credit. So it doesn't have to always be associated with technical engineering or land surveying. Sometimes finance courses, if it benefits you in your job responsibilities, they can be counted. So there are a number of different ways to get those credits. But there's always a catch, and that's also covered in the code. And that is, we have final say as to whether or not to accept the PDH as credit for your 30 hours that are required for each renewal. So yes, you can count very ultimately different things. I'm in the middle of the review right now, and I have rejected a couple of the PDHs that engineers and surveyors have submitted because it is not felt that it fully meets the code.
Underwater basket weaving would be a good example, Steve. You know, things that obviously have nothing to do with engineering.
Right.
Hey, I just want to make one comment, Steve. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
I forgot to mention, as far as keeping proof or documentation of your PDH activity, a really good place to keep that is your NCEES record. And maybe for some of the older engineers, you don't have an NCEES record. The younger engineers definitely do. There's a section in your dashboard on your NCEES record where you can upload documents. That is a great place to keep then you don't have to worry about a hard hard drive crashing on your computer. It's always stored safely there. So that's a good place to keep it. Anyway, carry on,
Yeah.
Steve.
Okay, thank you, Derek. That's a good point. So again, final say belongs to the board. Now, here again, we're talking about documentation, and I'm hitting on this, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail because that's what I'm getting in these audits that I'm doing right now. Is a lot of questions about what kind of documentation do you need? As you all know, in the old days, when I say old days, I'm talking 20, 30 years ago, it was required that you had a certificate. And in some states, the certificate had to have your name, your license number, and it had to be signed by the presenter. I don't know of any state that requires only that type of verification. There are multiple different ways, as Derek said earlier in the introduction, to verify the documentation. Now, he did mention the CPC account and the NCES accounts. Now, that's, of course, stands for Continuing Professional Competency. And I will have to say, if you're only licensed in this state or one state, keeping your own record will probably suffice. But for people who have multiple states that they're registered in, it's probably a good idea to use the NCES records because it is a one-source shop base, so to speak, and they keep track of everything for you. Now, one point I like to make is that you're given an account number, and this was a mistake I made, and I'll talk about this again in a minute. We ask for people who have the NCES accounts to send us your CPC number. Well, what I didn't say, and this was my fault, is that you have to send that account to the Nevada board. If you do not send it to the board, we cannot access the information. So a number of people have sent me their account numbers, and I try to open up their account, and it says no record found because they did not forward it or submit it directly to the board. So next renewal period, that's going to be addressed in the email that is initially sent out to the people who are going to be audited. But again, the step is you can reply and send us your account number, but you also have to send the authorization to the board so we can open your account. Other than that, I like to say just about anything else. You can use an attendance list as verification of your PDH. If you have the receipt for your registration for a conference, that counts. We do accept self-certification at times for certain things. You can do self-study where you have to self-certify yourself. There are several people in the ongoing audit that have not completed the ethics or the rules and regulations. So what I'm requiring that they do is watch the videos that are online and just send me an email statement saying, on this date, I completed this, and I'm accepting that as documentation. So, like I said, a lot of different ways. If you ever have a question about that, give us a call and we will work through it with you and let you know the best way to handle it. Now, what about the audits themselves? Well, as you know, there are 2 renewal periods every year. Renewal at the end of June, June 30th, and the end of December. So shortly after that, and it's also in the code that 100 licensees will be selected. Now, trust me when I say it is a totally random selection. We don't target anybody. We don't even know who's going to be selected. What we do is we just create a spreadsheet, and it's not in any particular order. It's a random selection of all the names of people being relicensed, a number's assigned to each name, and then we put into a random number generator telling that to select 100 numbers from 1 to 1,000 or 2,000 or however many renewals we have. And then it will pick 100 numbers, give them those, and those are the 100 people that will be requested to provide their documentation within the audit. So trust me when I say it is a totally random selection. You're not being picked out because you think we don't like you or anything. With that, as I mentioned before, the request would be, or the requirement would be, to send your documentation in support of your PDHs that you submitted on your renewal application. Any type of the documentation that we've previously discussed. I'm in the process of all documentation being reviewed. So I will verify that what you put on your report, activity report or PDH report matches, or the documentation matches. If deficient, what I'm actually doing now is working with the people now that do not have the right requirements, and they're jumping on it and getting it up to the speed. But by code or statute, you have 6 months to complete the required number of PDHs. But as most people, you would want to take care of that immediately so we can process through with your renewal application. Now, what kind of issues have we had? Just quickly, one of the biggest ones I found when I was trying to compile the contact information for everybody is incomplete data on your board profile. Now, it should be noted that if you have a job change or you moved, new cell phone number, new email or something, you're basically, you are required by code to inform us of that change within 30 days of the change taking effect. I did find one individual, he had his employment listed. When I called him trying to contact him, he'd left 2 years ago. We don't review them to see if it's current. We only find out it's not current if for some reason we have to contact you, you get audited or something similar, and we find out the information isn't correct. So please be sure that information is up to date. That will help tremendously. You may open your CPC record with the NCES, but if you don't download the documentation, it's really doesn't do any good. And that also pertains to sending authorization to the board so we can access it when we look it up. I had one complaint. The engineer was saying his files are too large. Okay, number of different ways to get around that. One thing you can also do if you don't want to go through NCES or reduce the size of the files, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the file sharing programs that are out there. We use a number of them within the board, and any of those would suffice to send larger files if that's the way it works out. Not sure what counts or what's required for documentation, which we've gone over. You can look it up in the code. If you have a specific question, as Derek has said, drop us an email, give us a phone call, and we'd be more than happy to work through it with you. Actually, this happened to 2 people I'm auditing today. They had kept all their documentation on the company servers. They left the company and forgot to get copies of that. And before they knew that they didn't have the copies or that they were going to be needed, meaning they were being audited, their previous employer had deleted it. So again, it's probably best to keep your own personal copies on a personal file. Recently moved, just had one engineer, he calls me from New Zealand wanting to work through the issues, but it can be solved. Other issues, and this is a pretty big one. I was a little surprised at the number of engineers and surveyors. Some of them said they didn't even know they were required to get ethics and rules and regulations. They weren't aware of the change in the code, or they didn't have the correct number of 2 PDHs. So again, what I would recommend, because this is the first thing I look for when I start going through your documentation, Because if I see that you do not have ethics and rules and regulations verified, I stop the review. I send you an email to tell me what happened, and that slows down the review. So this is my main flag that I'm going to stop looking at your audit if I do not find the rules and regulations and ethics documentation for the PDHs. Sometimes they can be hidden, like as one of the documentation was the program from a conference, and one of the sessions was ethics. That was their documentation for ethics, so they didn't have it listed on the activity report. It was acceptable and they were correct. But what I'm asking as a favor to us, list them individually on your activities report, please. You're not required to. I'm just asking as a favor. Check your spam folder. I have 3 people that have contacted me this week because the deadline for the audits to be in was Monday. And for some reason, the board emails went to their spam folders and they just found them yesterday and today. Again, it's not going to be an issue, but please, there might be hidden in your spam folder. So maybe after you get your renewals, a month or so after that, be sure you check your folder to be sure you don't have an audit sitting there waiting for you. This is, I don't want to call it a mistake, but something I did not do. And it caused my email inbox to get loaded up. What I will do in the future when we are doing audits is once you reply and send me your documentation, I will immediately send back to you that I received it. That was my fault. I should have done that. And I do apologize if there's anybody listening in who was being audited, but that is a step that we have implemented. You will receive immediate notification that we have received your documentation. Also in the response email, I assumed that it was kind of understood that you would reply back to my email, but it was not stated. It will so be stated in the future because we've had people send their documentation to Jasmine. We had it sent to the general mailbox. We have it sent to other individuals. So please, whoever sends you the email for the audit, reply everything back to them. But then again, this will again be spelled out in the new letter that we will be using. So that is what I just wanted to share with you about audits, PDHs, and documentation. Again, any questions you might have, we may try to get to them at the end of today, or just give us a call or drop us an email and we will get right back to you on that. A little bit more about licensees in Nevada that I thought was kind of interesting. You might not know, but we have almost 5,000 licensees between professional engineers and land surveyors. Of those licensees, only 23% are residents. The rest are out of state or out of the country. 78% are civil, 13% are electrical, 13% are mechanical, 10% structural. I know that doesn't add up to 100, but that's due to dual registrations. And for surveyors, the rest of the engineering makes up the rest of those percentages. Of the 14,800 licensees, only 5% are surveyors. So we are kind of hurting a little bit for surveyors, but they do an excellent job. Our most recent growth for out of state has been within California and Colorado. We're also seeing a large increase in international licensing, particularly through Canada. And that's one thing Patty Mamola, our past director, worked with when she was director and also is working with now with the NCES, and that is simplifying the international process. So more engineers can come in and get registered. Now, with that, let's get into a little bit of talk about ethics. What is ethics? If you think of a definition, what comes to mind when you think of a definition of ethics that will cover everything? Well, if you look it up, it basically, you will find a definition that says simply dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation, or doing the right thing at the right time, what you're morally obligated to do. Now, of course, if you look at the various disciplines, you can find a specific ethics definition for every engineering discipline or every profession that's out there. One I found for engineering, and you'll see the words may be a little bit different, but they basically are all saying the same thing. And that has to do with the principles and guidelines the engineers follows to ensure their decision-making is in line with their obligations to the public, their clients, and the industry, or more basically, safety, health, and welfare. Surveying, a little bit different form, but they say basically the same thing. Now, I had mentioned different professions, different organizations. And if you look at the various ones with regards to engineering and surveying, whether it's NSPE, EES, NSPS for surveyors, ASCE, our board, or even the Nevada Surveyors Association, they all have individual ethics definitions. But again, like I said, they're all the same. I've looked at all of them and reviewed a lot of them. And the one I found that I feel is one of the best or sets the highest bar with regards to ethics is the NSPE, National Society of Professional Engineers. If you go on their website, they have a ton of information concerning ethics with regards to the codes, the rules, the regulations. A world of information can be found on their website. And again, like I said at the very beginning, every one of these codes addresses that one statement or has that one statement in their code. And that is the engineer or land surveyor's obligation is to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. We state it in our code. In fact, if we state it in two places. You can find it in the NRS statutes under purpose. Again, the exact same thing. Safety, safeguard life, health, property, and promote the public welfare. It's also in the administrative code where they talk about safety, health, and welfare of the public. Now, I had mentioned the NSPE and that they set the bar for most ethics information. One thing that they do is they have what they call the BER, and that's the Board of Ethical Review. And that's a committee that was put together of NSPE members that review ethical situations that are submitted to the NSPE. And they keep a listing of those, and you don't even have to be an NSPE member to access this listing. And it was first started in 1958. And they have every case that they have reviewed listed in that file. And it's kind of interesting reading if you want to know the truth. So I was wondering what the very first ethics code or ethics case was that they reviewed. So I went back and looked it up, and it's kind of really interesting. And you can see by the number BA-1, that's number 1 from 1958. And what it involved, actually, it was an international case, if you want to look at it that way, and that an agency of the government was asked to prepare basic plans for a foreign hydroelectric plant. Well, it was just the basic plans. The foreign government knew it had to be expanded on, so they then took those basic plans and went to various consulting firms asking for them to bid on completing the the project. Several of the federal government engineers that worked on the basic design contacted these private firms hoping to get part of the work for the final design. A joint venture of firms was formed to handle the work because it was such a big project. The government engineers then resigned and entered into a contract to participate in the project. So, was this ethical? They had prior knowledge, I'm sure, of what the conditions were going to be and everything. Remember, though, this was 1958, not current time. I think you would probably address the answer differently if you were back in 1958 versus how you would look at it under today's codes. So, since we aren't live and we can't have a show of hands or anything, just take a minute, think about what you think the best answer would be. Then I'll tell you what the board decided. The outcome, believe it or not, was they felt the engineers violated the spirit of the ethics canons and rules, but there was not enough evidence to be proved that they were in violation of a specific part of the code. Now, the catch is they put the caveat as now written. Because of this, they formed a committee to change the code to address this type of situation. I think under today's standards, and I'm almost pretty sure of this, but it's my opinion that this would be considered a very unethical act by those federal engineers. Now, any of you who have attended my previous ethics presentations know I always do this because I like it. And question, how many states currently require ethics PDHs for professional engineers? And again, we would be discussing this a little bit more detail if this was a live presentation, but it's kind of hard to do when it's online. Believe it or not, 19 plus the District of Columbia as of January of 2024 of this year, which means through the end of 2023. What's interesting to note is that when I first started doing these ethics presentations in 2013, there were only 6 states that required an ethics PDH, being Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, New York, Texas, and Wisconsin. Since that time, it is more than tripled. And I think every year we'll see more and more joining on the ethics bandwagon, so to speak, and starting to require ethics. I've asked this question before, but anybody know why I have certain states shown in dark blue? Those states do not require any type of continuing education credits to maintain your PE, which I kind of surprising. So New Mexico or Arizona, Colorado, California, once you get your PE, unless you are, I don't want to say convicted, but have a major sanction against you, there's no additional continuing education required as there are in all the other states. I find that just a little surprising. Think land surveyors are the same as engineers? Same question? No, different number. And also, I guess I should put the two maps side by side. Not all the same states. There are some states that require ethics for land surveyors, but not PEs. And the reverse is true for some states. They require for PEs, but not land surveyors. Usually those are the states where there are 2 different boards, one for land surveyors and one for professional engineers. Every state that has combined boards require ethics PDH for each of them. And I update this information yearly. So hopefully next year, we'll see increased numbers on these two maps. Now, I also asked the question every presentation, what do you think the public opinion is regarding honesty and ethics for engineers? I'm sorry to the land surveyors that are in attendance, but they only address it for engineers. Do you think we have a very good reputation regarding honesty and ethics? If you ask the general public, the answer to that is yes. We are up into higher ratings with regards to honesty and ethics. You're familiar with Gallup polls. They started surveying various professions in 1976. Now, every year they don't do the same professions. So not every year can we update the information, but they started surveying in 1976. They have annual updates since 1990 of the various professions. They survey 23 different professions. But what's surprising is that every profession since 2019 has shown a decline in how the general public rates them with regards to honesty and ethics. And that includes engineers. So my question, and this is where I like this live because you get in some really good discussion, is what profession do you think is the top rated in the public's view of honesty and ethics? Nurses. What do you think is number two? In fact, nurses have been number one for 22 years straight, if you can believe that. Nobody comes close. And as I said on the previous slide, the percentage has reduced. Nurses are down to 78%. For all the years I did this, they were always in the 85 or higher percentile. But now that it's dropped down. What do you think is number two? Veterinarians. I love my dogs too. Engineers were number three, 60%. We've had higher ratings in previous years, but we're still number three. Dentists last year were number four, and doctors were number five. So the only non-medical, I count veterinarians as medical, profession in the top five was engineering. It's pretty high marks for us. But what we tend to have more fun with is what's at the bottom of the list. What do you think? Stockbrokers at 12. Advertisers, 8. I don't know. I always believe everything they say. Car sales, they used to be at the bottom of the list at 7%, but there are two professions that are below car sales. Senators and members of Congress. 6% being the lowest rating I've ever seen in any of the professions. And trust me, that's the only statement I'm going to make about politics. So we get questions, and I get a number of people have asked, so I put this in here. What happens when a complaint is filed? There is a set procedure that we have to follow, and it is very detailed and very involved. And I just like to share with you what those steps are. We do follow a board or a legislative procedure for handling complaints, and that's actually NRS 233. And that gives the format that we use as other agencies follow handling complaints. Now, for a complaint, well, for a violation to be a formal complaint, it has to be submitted on our complaint form, but we receive them many different ways. Written, some people just call up and say, we want to file a complaint. Email, like I said, telephone calls. But for it to be considered as an official complaint or possibility to be official complaint, we must receive a written statement on the Nevada Board of Engineers and Surveyors complaint form, which again can be found on our website. First thing we do is validate that a complaint, it's a true complaint. We get a lot of people just trying to cause trouble for, not a lot, I should say, but we receive complaints because somebody wants to cause somebody issues or problems. Those are quickly solved and nothing ever becomes of them. But we first validate it. I shouldn't say may be requested, will be requested, because a lot of times the documentation that is submitted with the complaint is not thorough enough, and we need more information. Then, once it is determined that it is a valid complaint, we send a copy of the complaint and all the backup documentation to the respondent, meaning the engineer or the surveyor who the complaint was filed against. And we ask for a formal response be submitted in writing of the complaint with documentation. We take that documentation, both from the complainant and the respondent, and review and verify it. We check and double check to be sure what is the truth. Upon completion of that investigation, we prepare internally what we call a case summary that details all the facts of the complaint and what our investigation found. It's then submitted to the executive director for his approval. And once that is done, the executive director selects a board member, one of the 12 people you saw previously, and termed the board liaison, who is to review the complaint and the findings of the investigation to see if it meets with the board's criteria and whether they agree, disagree, or if they require more information. If it's dismissed, we inform both the complainant and the respondent and advise them in writing that there was no validity to the complaint. If it's a very detailed or involved complaint, it could be taken not to just one member of the board, but to what we call an advisory committee made up of various board members and sometimes outside engineers and surveyors. If it warrants disciplinary action, and that's voted on by either the advisory committee or the board liaison, we write up our legal counsel what we term a stipulated agreement, or STIP for short. And what's involved in the STIP is a statement of what the complaint is and what the sanctions are to be as to handle the complaint against the engineer or land surveyor. It's given to the respondent for consideration, and they can either sign it and accept it, they can reject it. But if they say, yes, I did it, I am guilty, I will accept the terms of the discipline, they sign it, and then it's submitted to the full board for approval at the next board meeting. As I said earlier, if the board or the respondent reject it, a formal disciplinary complaint is prepared and then presented to the entire board for consideration. Then a hearing date is set, and the respondent has the opportunity to be present with or without legal counsel to answer and address the terms of the complaint and the stipulated agreement. Now, that is basically the steps we go through to handle a complaint. Another question we get sometimes is what we have termed how to avoid the call. That is the call you receive from the board stating that a complaint has been filed against you. It can be, I don't want to say intimidating, but it's not the type of call I would think anybody would want to receive. But there's some steps you can take in your daily activities that would help you prevent possible complaints or any actions being filed against you. So with that, we're going to stop right here for a minute. Let's take about a 5-minute break and get up, stretch your legs, get some water, whatever needs to be done. And Derek, I have 2:25 on my official watch. Let's try and get back by, oh, excuse me, 12:25. I have to remember I'm Central Time. So let's be back at the half hour.
Yep, sounds good.
30 on the dot. Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Yeah, I just want to be able to record it.
Oh, okay.
So there was a question. Mark asks, I'm curious how many engineers / land surveyors per year have complaints filed against them, and how many do not accept the steps? That's probably a better question for email. So if you would just shoot me an email, I'll have Steve follow up with you, and he'll be able to give you detailed stats via email. It's probably a better way to do it.
Some of those I'm going to have to do a little research on.
Right.
But
That also buys you some time.
thank you.
All right. You want to
Keep going now.
keep going?
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're on the downhill slide. I don't think we're going to take the full hour to finish this. Everybody always likes to end a presentation a little bit early, and so I'll try my best to get through everything. So, as we talked about right before the break, how to avoid the call. It's almost like common sense, but sometimes people don't think of them, or it's not top on their mind. And this all has to do with looking at the complaints we receive and the reason for the complaints. One tip or so is manage expectations with your client, meaning what you promise you're going to do, what your timeline is, when you're going to be finished, things of that nature, because a lot of times the client doesn't understand what is all involved in what you have to do. They don't know the intricacies of working with the various counties, cities, agencies, and the steps you have to go through to get everything approved, solve problems, or answer questions. So mainly keeping your client informed would help us out a lot. Probably the number one biggest complaint we get filed is, I can't get hold of my surveyor or engineer. They're not calling me back. And that also gets down to the code we're going to be talking about in a minute about being a faithful agent to your client. And that one of being keeping them informed. Just as verbal communication through phone calls or meetings. Another big thing is we get complaints. I've sent numerous emails and they do not reply back to me. I can't get hold of them. Same thing, what I just said applies to email communication. The client complains about everything not getting done. Sometimes engineer or surveyor taking on too much work, not necessarily with that particular client, but the amount of work that they take on. We can't control that. We can't tell you how to handle your business, but be aware that is a complaint we receive because the client, I'm sure, is just thinking about themselves, and they think that everything takes precedent, or everything regarding them takes precedent. Seems pretty basic, but we do get a number of complaints where engineers or surveyors are working outside their area of expertise. That is addressed in the code, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but not calling for help or other people, thinking you can do it yourself, and usually ends up or can end up causing problems. Understand the codes and statutes, what they say, and we'll have a few examples of these in a minute, and how they need to be applied. The majority of any complaint we have or question could have been handled if the respondent had been aware of what the code or regulation or statute actually says and how it needs to be applied. Now, what are the two statutes and codes? I've talked about them in the first hour. It is NRS 625, which is the Nevada Revised Statutes. And of course, the NAC 625, which stands for Nevada Administrative Code. So my question, are you aware of what is the difference between a statute and an administrative code? I would almost like to ask if anybody would like to address that question, but that could open up a can of worms for me. But the statute or a statute is a written law passed by a legislative body. And an administrative code is created by office or agencies under the authority of a legislative body. So statutes, basically, if you want it simply, are laws. Administrative codes are how those laws are to be applied. Is what I found when I looked it up, because I didn't know either. It was a kind of an interesting question for me also. Now, the NAC Code of Conduct has 6 different parts to it. They try to address just about the majority of the situations you might find yourself in, but they can't be all encompassing. So things have to be analyzed, looked at, and if it's not addressed by the specific code, give us a call and we'll see how we can help you out with that. But we have the fundamental principles, which addresses about being honest, importance of integrity, and the way you conduct yourself. The second one is relations with the public. This is where, if you remember from earlier, the statement about the safety, health, and welfare of the public came into be with regards to the ethics code. Probably one of the major ones is 530, which is relations with employers and clients. With that, that's where the term faithful agent comes into play. That's the first statement in this particular code about being a faithful agent to your employer and your clients. They also address vendors. And with that, it specifically address not receiving payment from them with regards to gratuities, things of that nature. So it's a pretty detailed explanation of what it covers. One of the key points is that you need to explain to your client what are the consequences if they do not follow your recommendations. I'm sure some of you have had that situation where you give your design, your submittal, your survey, or whatever to your client, and they say they want you to do it a different way, or they want you to change something. And what are those ramifications if they don't listen to your expert opinion? So these are all addressed in the various codes and rules under the Code of Conduct. Oh, the fourth one, relations with other engineers. Giving credit where credit is due. If you didn't do it, you shouldn't be taking credit for it, is basically what it says. Same thing with regards to, I'm going to say, talking badly about another engineer. That's actually a violation of the code. So be aware. This is probably one of the most important ones with regards to conduct or also complaints. And that has to do with written contracts. Now, we'll get into a little bit more detail about this in just a minute. And then finally, addressing PEs or professional engineers or land surveyors employed by the government and the conduct of people submitting to them. There's actually a code that addresses that area of concern. So again, you need to take a look at these, get a good understanding of them, and they may help you with helping prevent receiving the call, as we said from a little bit earlier. Now, what are the most common violations that we tend to see? What I did is I actually went back for a number of years and reviewed the various cases that were actual complaints. And looking at what violations were stated in the complaint that we were looking at. And all I did was count up how many times each part of the code was referenced. And the top 5 that came up after I was finished was NRS Section 410, grounds for disciplinary and other actions. NAC 530, relations with employers and clients, which I just mentioned. NRS 565, unlawful use of signature or stamp, which is a very detailed section of the revised statutes relating what you can and cannot do, or what you should or should not do with regards to your stamp and signature. Written contract, NAC 545. And like I said, we'll get into a little bit more discussion of that in just a minute, but very critical. A well-written contract protects you and the client. And if we see a number of complaints come in where if the contract had been written properly, following the basic rules of the code, there would not have been grounds for a complaint, or a complaint wouldn't have happened. So be aware, they are extremely important. And of course, from NRS 520, unlawful practice of engineering, which we will again talk about in a moment. Now, I talked about the written contract, and that is NAC 625-545. And in that, it's a very simple 3-statement standard or code. And as you're well aware, before performing any work, a licensee, meaning an engineer or surveyor, has to enter into a written contract with each client for the work to be performed. And it must include the following. The scope of the work, makes kind of common sense, but what are you actually going to be performing for that client? What is the cost for the completion of the work? Now, granted, a lot of times we all know things change, there are additions, there are change orders. So we're not asking that it be written in stone and can't be varied. Maybe it should be cost for approximate cost for completion of the work, however you might want to work it out. And then finally, anticipated schedule for completion of the work that indicates the time and sequence of each part of the work. Now, the reason I have highlighted this section in yellow is because that has recently changed. I believe it was this year. It used to say anticipated date for completion of the work. And again, that has also, the word date has caused problems in the past due to people not understanding there are changes that happen. There are conditions that were unknown at the time of the contract that could cause delays in the projects and things of that nature. So it was changed to anticipated schedule that gives you some leeway in your time frame. And then finally, it's not required, but you do have to make a disclosure on whether or not you currently have professional liability insurance. Again, I'm not stating that you have to have life insurance. You don't. It's just you need to provide a statement that says whether the insurance is in place or not. So those 4 requirements, if followed, you have a good contract. Now, it's important enough that if you go to the website, there is a more detailed, very detailed explanation of what a written contract means and what's required for each written contract, going into great detail and an explanation of why. So if you need a little bit more information on this, go to the website and you can get it, you can read it at your leisure, but it is it's a well written document that explains in great detail what I've just taken a couple of minutes to explain to you now. Now, one area that we have recently had not a number, but more than average complaints about is that concerns land surveying and entry onto private property. Now, that is addressed in the code, NRS 625.335. And as we know, you are allowed to enter private property, things of that nature, and to do your job. What the code actually says, though, and this is where it causes some confusion or complaints, is surveyor is required to provide written notice to the owner or occupant of the land before entry. That has to include the date, approximate time, and purpose of the entry, and also give the surveyor's or the surveyor's crew's name, license number, and business affiliation. Now, there are times you can't provide the written notice that I've been told. People aren't there. You tried, you can't get hold of the people, things of that nature. Well, what some surveyors have done, and actually your board has come up with, is a door hanger. If you look at it, it fulfills the intent of what the code states, and you are fully compliant with the code if you use one of these door hangers. I have talked with other surveyors who have developed their own type. One surveyor told me he typed up a letter that he puts in a sleeve or had laminated and puts it on the person's door, which gives them access. But I think within the past 3 months, we've had 4 or 5 complaints coming in about the somebody entered my property and I never gave them permission. Well, if you're going on the property to set a monument, check a monument, set a corner, a number of different things that are required, you're allowed to go on it even if they don't give permission, provided you follow the rules of the code. This is just an example of what would suffice with that. And a lot of times, we recently had a case where he received verbal permission, the surveyor received verbal permission to enter, and then the owner or the other party who owned the property said, I never gave permission, and it caused a pretty big stink. But if that surveyor, when he received verbal permission, had handed something like this or a business card within all the pertinent information to that person, it would have met the requirements and it wouldn't have been an issue. But again, this is the reason I'm also mentioning this is we've just had 3 or 4 cases where complaints have been come in solely because a surveyor entered property and the owner didn't feel that they were authorized to do that. It's also interesting to note, and I meant to mention this earlier, that when I gave the percentages of licensees and I said surveyors are 5% of the total licensees of there's almost 5,000 people. But statistically, surveyors are involved in 40% of the complaints that are filed. And one of the reasons we think is because of a situation like this. A lot of times you see two homeowners that cannot come to terms, are not very compatible with each other. A surveyor comes out trying to do his job, and one of them gets ticked off, and it's the surveyor that has to face the brunt of the angry neighbors. So anyway, following the code would help tremendously, and it also protects you. Now, let's finish up going over a couple of case studies of actual complaints that were filed against Nevada professional engineers and land surveyors, what the outcome of the investigation showed, and what the actual discipline in the stipulated agreement was, and what codes were violated in the complaint. So what I tried to find were examples of those 5 codes that are the most current one, or I don't want to say most popular, the ones that we see the most often when complaints are filed. And the first one is 410 grounds for disciplinary action. Again, relations with employers. These are just the ones that I mentioned earlier. Signature, written contract, unlawful practice of engineering. Now, the first case study has to deal with Section 410. And in that, in a little bit more detail, covers fraud and deceit, gross negligence, aiding and abetting a violation, conviction or entering a plea of dishonesty, violation of any provision of the regulation, discipline by another state. So yes, you can be disciplined by another state and also disciplined by Nevada. Practicing with expired license, believe it or not, it does happen. And failure to comply with an order of the board, or failure to respond to a request from the board within 30 days for information. So the first one about an expired license. And this one had to do with an engineer that let his license expire, which is a violation of Section 410. He continued to practice engineering until he self-reported himself in March of 2019. The reason we found out he self-reported was because the company that he worked for performed an audit of all the PEs and surveyors in the company and checked their license and found that he was expired, and told him if he didn't report himself, they would file the complaint. So he was filed in violation of those statutes. His license was suspended for 2 years. And what normally happens, unless it's a very, very serious violation, the suspension is stayed and the engineer or surveyor is put on probation for the same amount of time as the suspension. If you were suspended, of course, you wouldn't be able to work. But if it's suspended and stayed and you're put on probation, you can continue to work even while on probation. Subjected to a $1,500 fine, legal fees. He had to provide notification to all the developers that the projects were not properly stamped. Provide us with written notification that this was done, and also pay to bring everything back into compliance. Along with any probation, what is also required on every one of them is that the respondent or the person being sanctioned has to submit bi-monthly reports of all work that is performed within the state, what jobs they were, and give us more information about what was done. Even if no work was performed, you would still have to submit a statement stating that. Now, violation of Section 530 about relations with employers and clients. within this section, a little bit more detail, you're expected to act in a professional manner, act fairly and justly towards vendors and contractors, inform employer or client of any financial interest you might have in the project or that might affect the work you're doing. I mentioned earlier about informing your employer or client of the consequences if they want to overrule you. Work in your areas of expertise, maintain confidentiality, only get paid once. And this one concerns supplemental or second job work without the consent of your primary employer. So what happens here? We call it a surveyor gets busted. And what happened, and what you also see a lot of times, it's just not one section of the code that was violated. With regards to this situation, it was the violation regarded Section 530, relations, 410, disciplinary action, and it was considered a violation of unlawful use of signature and stamp, which is, of course, 564. What happened was, professional surveyor was hired to perform a boundary survey, locate and stake the corners, and create an exhibit. Later, same surveyor was requested to perform topographic mapping and encumbrance survey. All work was completed in 2019 and permitted, and construction was started later in 2020. What the surveyor planned to do was use his original work as the basis for the control of the subsequent work, which was used for permitting. An intern did the field work and created the map under the direct supervision of the professional land surveyor. During construction, it was discovered the survey was off horizontally by 6 feet and vertically by 7 inches. When the PLS stamped and submitted the plans, he failed to notice the areas, which technically is a violation of not maintaining responsible charge. Because as we know, responsible charge, regardless of who does the work, if you put your stamp on it, it means you are liable for the accuracy of that work. Not pertinent to the case, but it actually caused him to file bankruptcy, and no formal contract was provided for the work. What were the sanctions? 3-year suspension stayed with probation, bi-monthly reports. All stamped work requires now a third-party review, and a $5,000 fine. Document he has reviewed the codes and regulations, and prepare a paper on being in responsible charge of surveying. So again, you can see how it all tends to work out. Now, use of your signature. The more detailed breakdown of this code is what I just said about it's unlawful if you're not in responsible charge. Using an expired stamp or one that's suspended or revoked. We've actually seen times that somebody's used the retired engineer or surveyor stamp. And this is actually considered a criminal violation of a gross misdemeanor. The case actually involved 4 sections of the code. And you can see the seriousness of it. The license lapsed in 2009, but they continued to work until self-reporting in 2019. For 10 years, work was being performed and stamped, and the licenses expired. He admitted it, that he had signed and put false expiration dates for his license on plans that were submitted to agencies and clients. Now, He did maintain his California license in good standing throughout this period, which was beneficial to the board's decision. But we had to conduct, or the board, I wasn't here at the board at the time, third-party review of a sampling of the 37 jobs that were performed in Nevada during that 10-year period. The disciplinary action, 10-year suspension, stayed in probation for 10 years. $2,400 in legal and investigative costs. $22,000 administrative fine, which included the cost of the third-party review of the projects. But there was additional fees that were required because along with the $22,000, he had to assume the cost for reviewing and having re-stamping of the 37 projects that were performed during that 10-year period. And of course, required to complete an ethics course. Next is a contract, which we talked about a little bit in detail. Again, won't go into it. We talked about the particular aspects of a contract. And the case study here involves a written contract not being provided. So an engineer was hired to design a single-story building. No contract. Work included soils report, structural calculations, civil site plans, everything involved with the building design. The only thing that was provided were incomplete structural plans, and that was it. Nothing else was completed, but there was no contract, so nobody knew what had to be done. 1-year suspension with probation, bi-monthly reports, full refund to the client, and cost of $1,700. So that was a pretty short and easy one. Unlawful practice of engineering, a little bit more detail of what's involved in this code. Another person. Comes a number of different areas you might not think of that come involved with a license and a stamp. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it's a gross misdemeanor. So what happened in this particular case? 3 violations of various codes. Here, a PE firm, a professional engineer and his firm were negotiating to provide engineering services through several various states, Nevada being one of them. The engineer never completed the application for Nevada licensing. And he admitted that he had violated the above sections. Disciplinary action, 12-month suspension with probation, the reports, fine, administrative costs, provide notice to all the clients in Nevada that the firm and himself were not properly licensed. So as you can see, not following the rules of being of licensure, not only for yourself, but also for your firm, can have consequences. Now, Section 410, which was one of the very first ones we talked about, grounds for disciplinary action, as I said earlier, has various areas of for violations. And this particular one, I believe this is the one that has to do with discipline by another state. Or as I say for this one, self-reporting, but it has to do with another state's violations. So he was found in violations of 3 of the Nevada codes, even though the disciplinary or the violation was committed in California. So as it's stated in the code, you have to self-report yourself. You have to report yourself if you are issued a sanction in another state. So he was sanctioned by California. The California violations involved negligence and incompetence, unlawful use of the term structural engineer, unlicensed practice of land surveying, failure to provide a written contract. And what was the sanction by California? Well, his license was revoked for 3 years with probation for 3 years. The investigative cost by California, $10,500. That hurt. Had to pass the California Laws and Board and Rules exam again, pass an ethics course, and pass 2 college level board approved engineering courses. Now, these were also would have been found to be violations of the Nevada Code if he had been performing this work in Nevada. So technically, we could have also sanctioned him for those violations, but we don't tend to do that because we just don't want to, pile it on, so to speak. But we do take note of it, and what the board did do is the same suspension of 3 years with 3 years probation. But there was not any other types of sanctions except the requirement of the bi-monthly reports of the Nevada work performed. So we could be sure that he is being compliant with Nevada rules and regulations if he happens to be working over here. So those are just some examples of what happens in this state, what we take a look at, and hopefully it gave you a little bit of insight as to some of them you could say were accidents. Some of it appeared to be blatant, but what kind of things we have to face when complaints are filed. Derek, I think we finished a little bit ahead of time, so we can take some questions now if you have those, if you have anything there that you want to share with us.
Sure.
Or do you
Yeah,
want to
so
get
go
into
ahead.
the questions? You want to talk about the certificate and
Yeah.
everything?
Yeah, I'll cover all of that in a second. I was just actually typing a response to a couple questions here. So just since I'm halfway, I've sort of
If you
typed
want to
the
answer the
question.
questions, if you want to
Yeah.
answer the questions, feel free, because I'm sure they're probably tired of hearing my voice.
Well, it's I find your voice rather soothing, Steve. So
Thank you.
all right. I'm just responding to Jeff's question here that was specific to what you covered, Steve. If we get audited, how did we prove that we watched a pre-recorded ethics or Nevada laws and regulations webinar? And what I started to type, and you can expand on this in a second, Steve, but what I said was, and I think what Jeff is getting at, do we have to provide a certificate of some kind of physical proof that we attended or watched these videos? And the answer is maybe. Well, it kind of is, because what we'll ask you to do is provide a PDH activity report where you have to state the date, the time, how much time you spent in that activity, and we might ask for it for physical proof. But if you don't have it, let's say you watched the Nevada law or you watched this ethics webinar and you didn't save the certificate. If you just say, on this date, I watched the video, I spent 2 hours watching it, I give some basic description, I think we're going to accept that. Really and Steve, you might want to talk about what you're looking for. I know you kind of went through it already, but what you're looking for in terms of the proof that they provide or explanation that they provide during the audit. Maybe
Right.
that would be helpful.
Yeah, your answer was exactly correct, Derek. The best thing, and Derek's going to show you how to do this in just a second, is we provide a certificate during this presentation. You just have to take a screenshot of the of your screen. And that is verifying that you attended. As Derek said, I am accepting what I term self-certification, that you have your ethics and your rules and regulations. So what I am telling people I'm auditing now, I said, send me an email stating the date you watched it, and then I will accept that as verification or your documentation that you did obtain the PDHs for rules and regulations and ethics. Now, if you try to self-certify 30 different PDHs, we'll have to have a discussion about that, because we will, we do expect you to have something besides self-certification for all your PDHs. But for some reason, it seems like people are having issues with, they attend the webinars, they have trouble getting what they feel is a certificate. So I will work with you in this audit period. I am accepting self-certifications on those. But like I said, the best thing that you can have is some type of piece of paper, a receipt, a copy of the screenshot, or something that can verify that you were in attendance.
Yeah.
So
But
again, self-certification is acceptable by me for documentation.
But I just want to clarify one point, because we also just are not physically equipped to be in the business of providing certificates for everything. You are not required to keep a certificate to document your attendance of this. If you want one, I'll give you one, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. But for Steve's purposes, what he's talking about is if you get audited, if you're one of the lucky 100 that get randomly selected out of over, what is it? What is our number? 47,000 engineers and land surveyors? I don't know.
Well,
It's
they're 15, almost 15,000
yeah,
PEs and land surveyors, but each renewal period, I believe
Yeah.
there are several thousand renewals.
right. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's your chances are probably slim of getting audited. But if you are, that's the only time that you're going to be possibly required to provide the certificate. So anyway, I don't want to muddy those waters too much. I just want to be clear with everybody, because
Yeah.
I get hammered with requests for certificates after we do these things. And I just want to make you all aware that you just need to report the hour or the 2 hours that you spent, and that's good enough for us. For reporting purposes when you renew your license, that is. So, Steve, my email is up on screen. If you haven't gotten it yet, it's on the website under the board contacts. Feel free to email me, and that is the certificate. What I suggest you do is just take a screen grab, and actually it's the wrong date, Steve. I did update that on my. I think it's the same. I think it's the same file that. I think you're viewing
I
the
was
same
using
file.
your file when I was making corrections.
Yeah, if you do a refresh, it probably will refresh that date, but it should say November 13th, 2024. So apologies to that. I must have missed that.
My apologies too.
Anyway, so I hate to do this, but if anybody wants the certificate, I do have it saved with the correct date. Just email me and I'll send you one, just a PDF of that. So, yes, again, you just have to document that you spent the 2 hours on this webinar. That's good enough. Your word is good enough for us. And if you want to watch this, or anyone else for that matter, let's say someone was not able to attend this webinar, they're certainly able to watch the videos that we record and post on our website. And this is where they live, on the continuing education page. And when you scroll down a little bit on that page, you'll see links to the YouTube videos that I will post. And this one I will post later today and have that available for folks to watch. And they get the same credit, the same 2-hour credit for watching the video as they would if they attended live. So anyway, that's I think I've beaten that dead horse well enough. Let's get back to some of the questions that were here. I think we answered the one about how to document your attendance of the webinar or of the recorded webinar. There's another one here. How does the board control someone practicing engineering if they do not have a license? Well, I'll take a swipe at that, Steve. It's really, it's not my bailiwick, the laws. We have Steve and other folks that handle the compliance issues, but it's basically a cease and desist. If someone's not licensed and they're practicing engineering or land surveying without a license, we don't have jurisdiction over somebody like that. However, it's a cease and desist order against them, and then it could escalate to a criminal complaint filed against them. Did I explain that right, Steve?
Yes, that's true. That's it. Our standard practice is send a cease and desist letter. That usually takes care of it. And then if they continue, it could be pushed forward through the legal channels.
Right.
As a criminal complaint.
Mm-hmm. I'll just keep scrolling through and we'll see how many we can get through. Is there a statute of limitations if the probation is 10 years or older and was addressed to the satisfaction of the board? Is the disciplinary action permanently removed from public view? Steve, you want to? So in other words, does it ever get expunged? And the answer is no.
I do not think it does.
No, it does not. It's there for perpetuity. It doesn't mean that it's a scarlet letter that you're certainly capable of practicing engineering or land surveying after you've served your sentence, so to speak. But for record, I mean, if you look up engineers or land surveyors on our license lookup, you will see that they've had a compliance violation against them. That doesn't mean that they're not good engineers or land surveyors. It just means that we have to keep a record of that for historical purposes. And have been lucky 3 times since 2009. Anyway, yeah, so I think that answered that. If you want I can maybe give you a longer, or I can have Murray or Mark give you a longer explanation or answer to that question. Feel free to email me if you'd like. In the corner of the title, it shows the current date. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understood that, Rick. Feel free to email me if you'd like. Do handwritten notes help document PDHs? For self-study, yes. I mean, if you did, let's say you read an article, an engineering or land surveying article, and it was in a magazine, just taking a photocopy of it, or simply, again, we just require that you record the time. You could just make a note that on, November 13th, 2024, you read an article titled XYZ. You spent an hour doing it and you put your initials by it, a handwritten note. That's totally fine.
Yes.
If you want to make notes on an article, if you took a photocopy of that article and kept that as proof itself, and you want to keep notes on it, I don't know that it's really going to help us. We just want to know what you did, some kind of reporting that you did what you said you did. So I'm not sure written notes are going to help us determine that. Let's see. Appreciate the audit clarification. Can I have a certification of completion of this ethics webinar? Absolutely. Jeff, I'm not going to respond to your email here. Send me an email and I will reply to your email. Excuse me, on the Zoom presentation, if you take a screenshot, it shows today's date. Yes. And that's my bad. I will get that fixed and send you a PDF with the correct date. Is the client always right? Well, those of us that have been in business for ourselves might have our own answers to that question. But no, I think that's, that's kind of common sense. The client is not always right. And I think if it comes to a disciplinary review where both sides are going to be studied and evaluated and considered equally, you know, if there is no merit to a complaint that's been filed against an engineer or land surveyor, you know, then we're going to find no action is going to be taken. And no, the client is not, in that case, is not going to be right. So in other words, we do not side always with the client. We do, however, have a responsibility to safeguard the safety and well-being of the public. That's always going to be our default stance, but that's only going to be after we do a thorough investigation of both sides. So no, the client is not always right. Somebody answer that for me. Who may I contact if I have a license question I would like to ask offline? Where can I direct that question? We have a licensing specialist, Jasmine Bailey. If you have a specific question about getting licensed or renewing your license or getting a license in a different discipline, or if you're not licensed and you want to get licensed, Jasmine Bailey is the person you want to contact. Her email and contact is on the website as well. She's our licensing specialist. If you go to our board contact page on the site, you can get that. Screenshot text. Shot text was my comment.
Derek, did you notice I just changed the date on the cert on the?
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
if you want to take a screenshot, we have the correct date now.
Good job, Steve. You can take over my job as communications guy. Yes, as Steve said, feel free to take a screenshot of that. That's more than adequate for proof of attendance of this webinar. But again, I'll send you one. I'll send you a PDF, an official one. It'll look exactly like that. So it's not going to be any different than what you're seeing on screen. Any other questions? We'll give you a second to think about it, and then I'll get queued up to, we can end a couple minutes early here.
Yeah.
Steve, anything else you want to cover before we say goodbye?
No, I can't think. I just thanks for attendance. I noticed nobody was dropping off, but I appreciate that. And I know 2 hours is a long time to go, but appreciate everybody's patience.
Yep, we got one more question here. We'll get this one in real quick. If you are a co-author for a 43-101 technical report for a mining, oops, it got cut off here. Where did it go? Sorry, I've got a tiny little window that I'm trying to read here.
Derek, I think I know because I had a similar question on some audits I was performing. Co-authorship of papers, yes, that counts as PDE credits.
It does, but there's a matrix on our website that shows how much credit you can take for,
right.
that.
It's more than one. Let's put it that way.
It is more than one.
And that was the code that I had referenced earlier in the presentation.
Right. I can point anyone if they're interested. We have it available on our website, a kind of a matrix for, I think it's on the continuing education page, as a matter of fact, where it explains what credit you get for each activity.
Yes, it is.
Always seems that the client can file complaints, but they may not be worthy of putting the professional through the process. Just asking. Yeah. Absolutely, Richard. That is true. But again, all of the cases are thoroughly investigated and considered. So we never just wave any of them off. So anyway, one last thing. Again, I've mentioned before, this is going to be posted, recorded on our website. We will be doing this again in the spring timeframe, probably in the May timeframe. So we will do that again then. In the meantime, thank you for attending, and I'm going to end it here. We will see you next time.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Well, if I can get it to work.
Well, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.